and I wanted to be a theater actress. And right before I got an audition to work at the Bristol Old Vic, a job that I got, she said, "Darling, if not now, when?" And so I think "if not now, when" has been my mantra ever since.
You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where we hold the space for successful women in Hollywood to tell their stories. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Kathryn Leigh Scott. She is an actress who got her start on Dark Shadows and went on to work on The Turn of the Screw, The Great Gatsby, Little House on the Prairie, Magnum P.I., Dynasty, Dallas, Matlock, and more recently The Goldbergs and Broadcasting Christmas. She also was in the play Harvey with Jimmy Stewart in the West End. At the same time, she is a writer and owns a publishing company. I will put a link to her website on my website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, so you can see for yourself. You can also go there to buy the Other 50% swag for all your feminist friends. You can also find us on iTunes, on Facebook, and on Twitter at Other50%, PERCENT. Kathryn shared a lot of great advice and brought me to my new mantra, which is, if not now, when? Here, have a listen. Will you please tell us, what do you do?
I have twin careers, and they have been my twin careers since I was probably in high school. I'm an actor and a writer, and they're very much 50-50. I got a scholarship to Northwestern University when I was 16 to study acting, but I'd also applied in the journalism department, and it was their cherub program. And every time that I leaned toward writing, I would get a scholarship somewhere acting. For example, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. So I guess because my first jobs were in acting, and because I started doing a television series, it felt like writing took a back seat. And in fact, it didn't. I've always written magazine articles, and I founded a publishing company, Pomegranate Press, specializing in nonfiction entertainment subjects, which I've run now for about 31 years. And then I've written a lot of nonfiction books on film art, on classic television, on the bunny years, the 25-year history of the Playboy clubs told through the eyes of the women who worked as bunnies. And I also write a mystery series, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Jinxed in Hollywood, Jinxed in London. And I also write a lot of nonfiction books now. The most recent would be Last Dance at the Savoy, about caregiving. And I just finished a novel called September Girl. But I am also writing a book that's due in April called If Not Now, When? And that would be the subject, I think, of most interest to you.
Yes. I really perked up when you said that title. Tell me more.
Well, there was a wonderful woman who was my mentor. I met her when I was living in England. After I did a television series called Dark Shadows, I moved to England. And I did a lot of film and television, and I met this wonderful woman named Jane, who I actually keep her photograph here on my wall.
Oh, there she is.
And Jane was quite wonderful because she, every Wednesday afternoon, would teach me whatever I felt like learning. And sometimes she was an extraordinary woman. She was in her, there was a huge difference in our ages, vast difference. She was in her probably mid to late 70s. And she'd been a ballerina. She'd been a film actress in England. She had done so many things. She'd been married to a military man who was severely wounded in World War II. She was his caregiver. She had a son and daughter, but she never gave up her acting career. She'd been a singer, a dancer. She danced with Sadler's Wells. I mean,
Did you meet her on the show?
I know. I met her because somebody introduced me to her. And I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm a teacher." And I said, "Teach me." And but the reason why I bring her up is that Jane is the one who said to me when I was trying to navigate a new career, starting afresh after Dark Shadows. There I was in England, and I wanted to be a theater actress. And right before I got an audition to work at the Bristol Old Vic, a job that I got, she said, darling, if not now, when? And so I think if not now, when has been my mantra ever since. And as I grow older, I'm going back now 40-some years. As I've grown older, if not now, when is my mantra. And it's also the title of some blog pieces that I've written. It's also the title of a new book that'll be published by Grand Harbor in October 2017.
And how would you describe, what's the one-liner on it?
The one-liner is really an adage that my mother always said, don't put off tomorrow what you can do today. And the reason is that tomorrow might never come. So that's really what it's about. In other words, when I was in high school, I desperately wanted to go to Cuba. And I wanted to go and harvest sugarcane. I was young and rebellious, and I thought, wouldn't that be a fun thing to do? And I didn't make it to Cuba until a year ago, when I actually said to myself, well, now that we can go, if not now, when?
Yeah.
And I wrote a blog piece about Cuba. I'd always wanted to go to China, and I went. My husband passed away, and I really needed to shake myself up and just start afresh. So I moved from Los Angeles to New York. If not now, when? In other words, you don't put things off because tomorrow might never come.
Exactly. That's been my mantra this year, too.
Oh, good.
It's time to just do the things you want to do.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are so many things. I thought I haven't been acting that much lately, but honestly, I do love acting, so if not now, when? Well, I've done 3 films this year.
So you are still very much
in 1
acting.
year. So I did a wonderful film that'll be out next year with Richard Gere and Juliana Margulies and Peter Dinklage and Jane Alexander. It's called Three Christs of Ypsilanti. But I also did a wonderful little comedy, a family comedy that I filmed in Connecticut with Melissa Joan Hart. And that'll be on Thanksgiving Eve at 8 o'clock on Hallmark Channel.
Oh, wonderful.
And now I start another film next week in upstate New York. So it's one of those things also, if you say if not now, when, it's also another way of just putting it out there and saying, this is what I want to do. It's like build it and they will come.
Mm-hmm. To what do you attribute the longevity of your career?
Oh, persistence, just doggedness. I write because it's compulsive. I think most career writers are compulsive writers.
You can't help it.
I can't help it. I write 7 days a week. Most writers I know write 7 days a week. It's just one of those things. I'm a very early riser. This morning I woke up at 5. I wrote for 2.5 hours. I mean, that's what you do.
Yeah.
The ideas are freshest. So I can't not write. And acting, it's interesting. I really love acting, but I realize that when I do all of these personal appearances and podcasts and television interviews and so on for my books, it's utilizing that part of me. Almost everything that I know as an actress I use in my writing. Almost everything that I've learned as a writer I incorporate into my acting.
So they really are hand in hand.
Oh, they're totally hand in hand. As a writer, I never forget what an actor always remembers, and that is that you have to utilize all 5 senses. You don't just see and hear. You touch, taste, feel. You use all your senses, and those must appear in your writing. You can't forget those senses. And I also think that I tend to write in scenes. I tend to see something happening and then write what I see. But as an actress, I visualize. I always visualize. I can see things unfolding. So yes, they're totally twin careers. Those 2 parts of my thinking just lend themselves to acting and writing.
It goes together so well.
Oh, yes.
So going way back, did you get an acting degree or a journalism degree? Or both?
Let's see, what did I do? I graduated from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Yes, I guess acting. Yes.
So then, did you just go right into
acting? I got a job acting.
Was there no struggle?
No, there was no struggle, and the struggle didn't come until after I got my first job. I got my first job, and I thought, well, this is easy.
Yeah. What's everyone complaining about?
It happens that way sometimes. And not that. Oh, by the way, I should say that there was a period of time when I was working, but it was also a struggle because you're just you haven't latched on to that thing that really gives you a career. Mm-hmm. And writers are that way too. You write and write and write, and the stuff goes into the bottom drawer. It doesn't sell, or as they very often say, that first thing you write gets you your agent, but it doesn't necessarily get you your publisher. Mm-hmm. So it's very much that way.
It could be the same with acting. You could work 5 days a year and be successful.
Yeah. I have to say, Dark Shadows was that turning point for me. It was my first acting job out of school. But then there's also that period of time when, first of all, I do not understand anybody who thinks that they plan a career. That's a joke. The gods laugh.
Right.
The gods laugh at that one because, as John Lennon used to say, life happens when you're making plans. So many of the things that have happened, I've just sort of followed my instincts, which is what I think most people do. Mm-hmm. You fall in love and you're carried off to a new destiny, and certainly I was. But then I also, I never lost sight of the fact that, I think this is terribly important for women. I don't know how many women I've counseled over the years. You've got to hold your own purse strings. My great aunt used to say that. She was a traveling sales lady. She sold electrical corsets and girdles all across the Midwest. And I remember, I've got so many of her letters, but she believed a woman had to hold on to her own purse strings. Mm-hmm. And for a woman, especially of her generation, to not know what the family finances are, to all of a sudden have to be on your own, a widow or whatever, and not know what the bank account number is. A woman has to have her own money. A woman has to have her own sources of income. It has nothing to do with being happily married or loving your spouse, or it has nothing to do with anything. Mm-hmm. Except that, as Jane, my mentor, used to say, you come into this world alone, you leave it alone. And you have to remember that life happens.
There are a lot of women today who still are not taking control of their own finances.
No, I really have. Not so much now. Women are a little more onto it, but I remember a time in my life where I really did just have serious conversations with a friend. And that's not, I cannot stress this enough. It had nothing to do with a marital problem or anything like that. It just had to do with self-respect, common sense, looking to tomorrow. I am pragmatic above all.
And you just never know what's going to happen.
You never do. For the sake of your children, for the sake of yourself not having children. I think I wrote my mystery series, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, because...
I love that title.
I know. For a long time I was working with the homeless program at my church. And I would see these women come in, and they were actually nicely groomed. And I wondered why they were there. They were living homeless. That is to say, they were couch surfing, they were finding some way of shelter. A few of them lived in their cars. But they knew how to groom themselves at the department store. They knew how to go into the ladies' room at or find a health club and whatever. They were so resourceful. And really, Down and Out in Beverly Hills is the story of a woman who has everything, who has had a successful career, a self-made woman, and and loses it all. Loses everything. Loses her reputation. She's drawn into something, and she ends up living on the streets of Beverly Hills in her Ritz Volvo, as she calls it. And she's immensely resourceful. I wanted this woman, not to have a mental health issue. She ends up there. She's prideful, but that's also what helps her pull herself up by her bootstraps. And it resonated with women. Every book club that I spoke to, women started talking about a primal fear, which is, how would I take care of my family if? What if? And that's really what the book is about. I mean, it's it's sort of a lighthearted mystery romance, but it has a very gritty core.
It's a real fear. Like, I talk about it with my girlfriends, and everyone is gainfully employed, producers, attorneys, like real jobs. Uh-huh. And we all feel like we're one paycheck away from our shopping cart.
Well, you are. You are. And I'll tell you why. Because no, I'm not even going to reassure on that score, because when I got the idea for doing the book, and I drew way back on the earthquake in California in 1994. I mean, I wrote this book many years later, but I thought about that because a woman that I knew who was a producer had a beautiful house, had given up the earthquake insurance. The house completely fell down the hill.
Oh, gosh.
She lost absolutely everything. And the man that who was her significant other that she had been living with for a while abandoned her. And she also lost her job as a result of the earthquake, just because the business that she was... I mean, it was one of those perfect storms. Okay. She wasn't necessarily one paycheck away. I think she was 3 checks away. And she really lost everything. She couldn't afford to have the rubble removed from the lot. And she had no insurance she had house insurance, yes, but not the earthquake insurance. And yes, there was FEMA. So there were certain little things, but nowhere near enough to be able to regain her life. She ended up as a substitute school teacher, and she was living in her car for about 3 weeks. That was all. But she did live in her car.
Oh,
so I really do. So what I talk about in Down and Out in Beverly Hills is, I mean, it's not fanciful. Mm-hmm. Although I write about it in a kind of fanciful sort of way, but I've seen it happen. It takes very little. It takes a catastrophic health issue, an accident, a divorce, a sudden death in the family, a spouse or whatever. It takes almost nothing. It takes a bad business manager. It takes a business going under. Yeah. It takes so little.
We're all very close to the edge.
We're very close to the edge.
All the time.
And it's not that I live with a cloud over my head either, because I don't live in fear. But I live with an awareness. Put it that way. And that's really what I wanted to write about.
It's important.
Yes.
Now, changing gears a little bit, at what point did you meet your husband?
Oh, I met my husband many years ago when I was doing Dark Shadows. I was living in New York. He had started Los Angeles Magazine. He was the founding editor. Oh. He founded the magazine in 1960 when he was doing graduate work at UCLA. And it became the first city magazine in the country. He developed the template for that, and there are some 400 of these city magazines now, including New York Magazine that started in 1968. I met him in 1968, and I met him at a party, a press party in New York. He was with Tom Wolfe, who was wearing a white suit, of course. And in any case, we met. But he was in LA with a magazine. I was in New York with a series. We each married other people. And then 20 years later, one of his editors chose one of my books as a Christmas gift selection. And in the interim, my marriage had collapsed and his wife had passed away. And we met, and that was it. 20 years after we first met, we were inseparable and married. And then my husband became very ill in 2007 with a neurological disorder. It's progressive supranuclear palsy, which is one of a family of 5 diseases called prime of life diseases that includes cortical basal degeneration, multiple systems atrophy, and by the way, and Lewy body, which is the disease that Robin Williams had, and of course Lou Gehrig's ALS is part of this as well. So, and they all have similar symptoms. And he passed away. It's a progressive disease. He passed away 5 years later, and so that is why I wrote the book Last Dance at the Savoy, which is about caregiving. Again, I took notes thanks to a doctor who told me to keep a journal because he would be prescribing off-label medications and to keep track. And I ended up recording everything, which again was the template for the book. But also, again, it's a cautionary tale. We never know when these things are going to happen. And I think I'm very lucky because we had a very good relationship before this happened. And the things that I learned during that period of intense caregiving, I really wanted to pass along.
Now tell me, over the course of your career, was there a point, like hitting a certain age, where there was a lull? Or were you able to work?
You mean that point where you feel invisible?
Yes, that
point. Where you walk in and people look straight through you? Where? What? Where you wonder if they're going to offer you a glass of warm milk instead of a glass of wine? Yeah, that
what
happens.
Was that period like?
Yeah, I would say that it just sort of automatically happens somewhere in one's. It's perimenopausal, I think. I think it all comes together at the same time. Somewhere in those early 40s, there's that turnaround period. I think I was lucky because for me it coincided with starting the publishing company and just having my career going in a slightly different direction.
So you were dependent on the acting.
Well, yeah, the acting and and I became, and then I just became more diversified, shall we say, and it also, I had a young marriage, a remarriage, so there is that odd period of time, and I think that one can overreact to it, depending upon where you are in your life. If you don't have a baby and you're desperate to start a family, if you don't have a mate and you're desperate to find a mate, if your career is falling apart,
so it's the desperation as the underlying.
Yeah, that's all part of that passage. I think that's when you leap into Botox and facelifts, which I didn't do. I've still never had. Still never used any of that or had any of that done. And now I'm way past it, and now it's too late.
Well, you look great, I'll tell you that.
But the real issue is that I think we all find ways to shake ourselves up, I just mentioned, cosmetic surgery and stuff, but it takes a lot of other directions as well. And I guess if one is going to ask that question for the first time in one's life, if not now, when, it probably happens around then. I mean, it is a huge transition because women do have a biological clock, and I think that there's also an emotional clock that's ticking away as well, where how you look, how you feel, how you think you've used your potential. You have a college degree, but have you really used it? You don't have a college degree. Is that holding you back? I mean, there are all of those things that happen, I think, and that thing of feeling invisible can also happen for a woman whose children reach maturity, and the focus is on them. You become sort of an afterthought or an empty nester. That all starts happening.
Right. Did you have children?
No, I don't have children. No, I think I probably would have been a good mother, but honestly, things just didn't work out in that direction. That's an interesting thing, because somebody said, "Do you regret having children?" And I said, how can you regret? It's just, I think it's improper usage of the word, put it that way.
Yeah.
Because that's not it. It represents such a huge passage in a woman's life, and I think the commitment to having children is so great that question is usually asked by a woman who has children because they can't imagine their life without. I mean, it is such a huge commitment.
Well, I think it's a completely different life path.
Yeah.
Like I wonder what it would be like not to have children. I can think of a billion things I'd be doing instead. I mean, I love my children dearly. They're my life. However, I can certainly see that.
Yeah. It's just a completely different kind of life. So, but then you see, I probably have as many women friends who've never had children, and quite a few never married, as I do, who married and had children.
Interesting.
Yeah, I absolutely, and I've never heard a word of regret among women who didn't have children. I do know of 2 women who terminated pregnancies and have had severe adjustment problems over the years. Really sorry that they did that, because they never had children. I just happen to know a couple of women in that category, but otherwise, no.
How has the entertainment industry changed for women since you've been in it?
Well, the very first director that I ever worked with in my entire life was a woman.
What?
Leigh Swift. She just passed away now, I think at the age of 95, a year ago. She was quite wonderful. She won awards in the days of the golden age of television, live television. She was phenomenal. She was terrific. I did work with another woman director for another 20 years. How has it changed? Again, we can jump up and down and scream and yell. There's not enough opportunity for women, but one, you have to make your opportunities, and 2, there are just so many factors. Why? I mean, war movies were always about men. Why? Because women weren't in the military. So they're just such, obvious things like that. And then China Beach came along, and suddenly you had a whole lot of women on the front lines. That's almost a perfect example of how things changed. The more women have gone into other fields. I mean, there's Sandra Bullock up in the, the stratosphere, or outer space, rather. And that wouldn't have happened without Sally Ride. Our concepts have changed. I think if I could point to the biggest change, nobody ever talks about it, but it's absolutely true, and that is computer science. It revolutionized everything, because it didn't matter what you looked like or who you were. It had nothing to do with brawn or beauty. It had to do with your skill and brains, and it just absolutely opened the doors for women. I know there's a lot of talk about what's happening in Silicon Valley and so on. There aren't enough women up there, running companies. So go run a company.
Yeah.
How many women have started companies? And, you're an example. I mean, I started a publishing company. Nobody told me a woman couldn't have a publishing company. So I did it. Go and do it, for God's sake.
Just shut up already.
Yeah, exactly. Just go do it. Don't complain that somebody hasn't done it for you or made it possible for you or handed it to you. Just go do it.
Yeah.
I know that sounds, I can imagine how many people are listening to this will get irritated by it. But the point is, you just go and do it.
Yeah.
I mean, my brothers have gone and done it. Why wouldn't I go and do it? It's never quite made sense to me. But how has the entertainment field changed? There was a small pocket of women, 4 of them, who at some point I guess it was in the 70s, all of a sudden they were directing a lot of television. And again, I think it's always been people wondering if women had the stamina. Even in this latest election, the word stamina came up. Because can women, on the battlefront carry a 120-pound pack on their back? Well, yeah, they can. I mean, I belonged to a Girl Scout troop that did, primitive adventure camping. Mm-hmm. Of course, we can go out and put up a tent, of course.
The stamina question cracks me up because women can take care of everything with 2 babies on their body.
I know.
Stamina? Really?
And nobody multitasks like a woman. So,
yeah.
In other words, it's just never occurred to me that women can't do it. I grew up on a farm. I drove a tractor. My brother drove a tractor.
Oh, you did?
So, I mean, what is the big damn deal? Nobody ever told me I couldn't drive a tractor.
Yeah.
So,
why are we still talking about this?
I know. It makes no sense. I don't talk about it. You've asked me about it.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I talk about or I particularly care about. Actions speak louder than words. Mm-hmm. Go do it. And women are, by the way. I mean, it sounds like...
Oh, they are.
I mean, women are. And there's very little now that... you see a woman artist doing big, art installations. You see people doing all sorts of things that are really have become just gender neutral. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really do think that computer technology is gender neutral.
It should be.
I think it is. And even people like Melissa Meyer and so on who, pop a baby while, still conducting business, mm-hmm. Are extreme examples. But I think women are doing it.
Yeah. They are, everywhere.
Yeah. And my mother did it, for heaven's sake.
What'd your mother do?
My mother took what was really a menial job, working in a school lunchroom, and then turned it into a career in nutrition.
Did she really?
She just plain did it.
Yeah.
And she had 3 children. She just did it.
I think we probably need more of that.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Now, do you know, over the course of your career, were you paid equitable to your male counterparts?
No, I did have that one experience, and I spoke up about it. It happened in England, and at the time I was doing a play in the West End. Mm-hmm. I was doing Harvey with Jimmy Stewart.
What?
And I was hired to do a television commercial, and it was a 2-day shoot, and they knew that I had to be out by 6 o'clock because my half hour. Mm-hmm. We had a curtain at 8, and they said, "Oh, that's fine," and they named this actor who was also in a West End play. Who is also going to play my husband in this thing, except that I would be working 2 days. He was only in 1 segment and had no lines.
Okay.
And on that first day, we were just talking, and he happened to say something, and I said, wait a minute, how much are you being paid? He was being paid exactly the same amount that I was being paid, plus a bit more. Now, we're both doing West End plays. Mm-hmm. If anything, I'm a little better known than he is.
Yeah.
I'm working 2 days, and I'm doing all the heavy lifting on this commercial.
Yeah.
And I'm getting less pay. I went to the casting director, and I also spoke to my agent about it. And my agent, who is a woman, said, "You're not going to believe what I was told." And I followed up with the casting director, and she said it to me. A woman casting director. She said, "Oh, yes, but he has a wife and a couple children. Come on, Kathryn."
Really?
Oh, come on, Kathryn. Like,
you don't need the
be
money.
Silly. Don't be silly. I mean, I thought, that doesn't even make sense. It was the only time in my life that I really come up against that one.
Yeah. Did they fix it?
No, they did not fix it. But I will tell you this. On Dark Shadows, my very first job, I got paid as much as the other actors.
Well done.
Yeah. I think Jonathan Frid got paid more when the show really took off. But when we started, no, we were all paid the same amount. I mean, he really became the figurehead on the show. Mm-hmm. And I suspect in that last year he got paid more.
It's funny because I've heard very recently women being told you don't need to make as much because you don't have a wife and children.
By the way, I'm going back to 1973.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, when I did worked at in rep theater and so on, no, I was paid this. We were paid the same. When I did Harvey, the actor playing Dr. Sanderson opposite me, another American actor, we had about the same number of credits. All the rest of it, we got paid the same. Mm. So now, if you're whatever the pay scale is, or whatever your quote is, or whatever. I don't know. All I know is that I've only had that one overt experience.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as a writer, I get the same advance. It's based on what
Based on sales?
Yeah.
Great. Have you experienced, did you experience much sexual harassment?
No, this is odd. I've been following the Gretchen Carlson thing. And no. I never have, although what I will say, because a couple of women have sort of mentioned this in terms of sexual harassment, but there is a kind of bumptious behavior. I remember this one director who just always had to have a hug from the girls, but he was this kind of big teddy bear kind of a guy, and we all kind of laughed, and big deal. He gave us a hug.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have, hugged the guys, but just kind of bumptious behavior.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sexual. He didn't rub himself up against you or anything like that. But I put it in that category. I think it's very important, the signals that you send up. I think it's something that
say more about that.
Boys and girls, I think, have to learn this. I was a Playboy bunny, for heaven's sake. And by the way, I know many of the women who, I shouldn't say many, I know 4 of the 50 or so women who have now spoken up about Bill Cosby. But I was a Playboy bunny. And the one thing that I did learn, working in that adult environment when I was still a teenager, half naked, serving food and drink, was how to send up the right signals, how to behave so that it wouldn't occur to somebody to put their hand on my thigh or, grab my bunny tail or whatever. There's just a certain way of behaving.
Can you
and
describe?
I think sending up the right signals makes absolute sense. And the one time, and this would be sexual harassment, except that it never went anywhere, there was a director that I met when I was still working in New York. I think I was still doing Dark Shadows, but I remember he invited me to an event, or I met him at an event, and we had drinks afterward. And he told me that I would be perfect for a role in a feature film that he was trying to put together. And I said, wonderful. And so we had this marvelous conversation. And he dropped me off in the taxi and then got out of the taxi at my apartment building. And he made a
pass.
well, pass, yeah. He made a pass at me. And then he looked at me and he said, I mean, okay, you know I'm married. And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, but it's okay, my wife and I have an understanding. And I said, well, you don't have an understanding with me. And he said, you know, just hearing you say that makes me realize you're not right for that role. And I thought, but that's the most, it was so blatant. It was
that's a little quid pro quo.
Well, it was so blatant. It was so obvious. And he subsequently, I ran into him in Hollywood years later, and he was married to somebody quite well known. And so obviously he divorced whatever the other wife was and married this one.
Surprise.
And I never forgot that, but it struck me as funny, not harassment, because it was just so blatant.
Yeah. And you weren't worried about getting the job, apparently.
No, I didn't worry about it. I don't think the job ever existed, if you want to know the truth. I think the fact that I probably would have had a different feeling about it if he hadn't been so blatant, and the job just sort of dangled like this carrot he just thought up. It was a
good try, fella.
So yeah, good try.
Good try.
Really work on that line. But no, I haven't ever experienced somebody chasing me around a casting couch, or no, I haven't. Thank God. And I don't know. These women have made a point of saying, like Megyn Kelly, that when you are in your first year as a reporter and you've got somebody who is making sexual advances and you report them, but where do you stand when it's somebody so powerful? That's a situation I haven't experienced. I've never had a producer on something that I'm working on, or I've never been under contract somewhere where that's arisen. That's a really tough one to deal with.
Yeah.
But no, I've just never ever had that experience.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a success?
Oh no! This is the funny thing. You're always reaching. Do I think I'm a success? I'm really glad for the experiences that I've had. I'm happy about the books that I've had published, but I'm always thinking, you're always striving. You're always reaching for that next thing. Mm-hmm. I suppose one enjoys the success one has had without always realizing that you can't lie on your laurels. They're just a little too prickly.
What have you not accomplished that you still want to accomplish?
Oh gosh, I really want to write a breakout novel, a breakout mainstream novel. I hoped I had it with Dark Passages, and I didn't, which was a paranormal mystery. But I've now written a novel, September Girl, with my agent, and I would love to see that be a breakout novel. And yes, I've done several television series and miniseries, and I've done some really wonderful films. But one is always looking for that really wonderful role that is just yours. That's
just it.
Big and juicy and
yeah.
Sure, I would love that. And here's another thing, because this is something women of my generation and my vintage will also say. Gloria Steinem, about whom I wrote in the bunny years, and of course we were in bunny training together. There were only 7 of us in bunny training, and she wrote about me in her article. But I did take Gloria to task about 25 years ago. She wrote a very odd piece in the New York Times in which she said that she counseled her women friends over the age of 50 to forget about romance. And it appeared in the New York Times. I've got the clipping buried somewhere in my clippings file. And I was so offended by that. For one thing, I just had a new second marriage, a young marriage, and I had girlfriends who, were 50, getting married. A very close friend getting married at 50, and for the first time, by the way. And so I wrote a piece, and they published it in full in the New York Times, which rebutted what she said.
Yeah, why did she say that?
I have no idea, because she subsequently got married.
Yeah, that's what I
So
thought.
it was right prior to that,
maybe she had given up.
Yeah, I have, but I found it so odd because it was so negative, so negative, and I was so appreciative of the New York Times for publishing my piece in its entirety. And I think about it now, 25 years later, because I am a widow, and I don't. Since you asked me what's still ahead, there might be romance still ahead, and why not?
Yeah.
So, if you hadn't asked me that question, it wouldn't have occurred to me to say that. But why not?
Why not?
So again, it's if not now, when?
Yeah. We're still alive. Why not have a little love?
Exactly. And I don't know, maybe by the very fact that she got married, Gloria changed her mind. But it was a very, very odd thing.
It sounds like it was just in a very personal place she had given up.
Yeah, could be.
Doesn't make it universal, Gloria.
Yeah, why are you chasing romance? That was really the...
Okay, as an unfeminist notion.
Yeah, why do you change? Anyway,
yeah. Okay, now here's something I ask everyone: are you a badass?
A badass?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I was a badass this morning.
What happened?
Well, a company from whom I bought a single product, then, without my knowledge, continued to charge me for that product. And I've called once to say, no, I just ordered that product once. Sounds good. And then it showed up on my credit card again. And so I called the credit card company this time. But I did call the company and say, you realize what you're doing? And I was very harsh with them. Because I had an email, saying that your order is canceled. So why are you charging me yet again, another month?
So you held them to task.
So I took them to task. Yeah, I was a badass about that. And I'll tell you one thing that I really can't abide, and that is anybody doing something that is irrevocable, doing something that is hurtful or that can't be undone. I would be a real badass if I saw or experienced somebody doing that.
Over the course of your career, did you ever feel like an imposter?
I've been an imposter. I mean, I think that's my career. That almost defines what an actor is.
That's my profession.
I'm a professional imposter. Have I ever felt like an imposter? I've been an imposter. Actors very often say, when are they going to find out that I really don't know what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I think writers feel that way as well. When are they, I can only answer that one kind of, in jest.
Yeah.
Yes, I suppose every time you walk on a film set, you just, what
am I doing here?
Yeah, exactly. But an imposter, pretending you're something you're not, I do that for a living.
What do you feel the next steps are for women in the business?
Oh, I don't know. I think the next steps for women is to just accept that they are 51% of the population, that they are They're not taking a back seat to anybody. If you're sitting in the back seat, it's because you want to be there. Literally, I mean, you choose to sit in the back seat.
Yeah.
But if you choose to, to be driving that vehicle, do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. I think those are the lessons. I see my nieces really blossoming, doing all sorts of things and kind of taking it for granted. And I think that is the most acceptable thing for women to do. Just take it for granted.
Yeah.
You don't need to fight anymore. Just do it. And by the way, I published a book many years ago about Koya Knudsen, who was the congresswoman from Minnesota who was drummed out of office by her husband, who was a farmer and said he wanted his wife home back in the kitchen, back on the farm. It was took place in the late 50s. It's a wonderful story. Koya Come Home, Koya Knudsen. I just had the book come out again, republished it with a foreword by Walter Mundell to benefit the Oslo Center for Peace and Humanity. But it's a wonderful book, written by Gretchen Uranus Bido. And she was the one, because all of these guys coming back from the war had student loans.
Oh yeah.
And she patterned. She actually, it was the Title II of the Defense Act. She actually latched onto that and wrote legislation that existed in Norway but it allowed women, all students, but women to also be eligible for student loans.
And did she leave politics then?
Did
she go home?
She went home. She went home, but she kept fighting. It's just a wonderful story. But again, I admired her enormously. She was a childhood hero of mine, and I was very lucky to have met her and then to have published her story.
Yeah. Say the title one more time.
It's called Koya, Coya, Come Home, based on the headlines. Those headlines screamed all over the world. Perry Match, Stern, Figaro, all of the newspapers in the United States, Koya Come Home. It was just a huge headline, and she lost the election to a good family man, and went back home. So, but anyway, I read the book. It's been so long now since I've looked up that information, but she had a lot to do with writing the legislation for student loans, and I think the culture in our schools has changed. Mm-hmm. So I would say to my nieces and nephews and any other a young person, just do it.
You have such a Midwestern, practical view about that. I love it.
Well, I'm very practical. I really am, above all, pragmatic.
Yeah.
I really am.
So great.
You've been listening to The Other 50%. I'm Julie Harris Walker.
I want to thank Kathryn Lee Scott for sharing her story.
And special thanks to Jonathan Lucas for editing, Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on iTunes and subscribe and leave a review, and on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, for added features and bios of our guests.
And of course, coffee cups and t-shirts.
You can also follow us on Facebook under The Other 50%, the numbers and the percentage sign, and on Twitter as @other50%. Thanks for listening. See you next time.